Welcome to the March Threat Spotlight video from Cisco Talos. I'm Hazel Burton. So in the spotlight this month is the APT Turla. They've been doing some interesting activities and implanting some new tooling. Isn't that right, Bill?
That's correct. Yeah. Interesting
So,
stuff.
some interesting stuff. So what can you tell us about the background to this particular APT Turla? What have we kind of seen them do in the past?
Yeah, sure. So Turla, they are a Russian espionage organization. They do a lot of that kind of thing that you think of when you think of espionage APTs, right? And so it's a lot of targeting government agencies or military, and then also like education in the research space or pharma, something that kind of has that juicy neopolitical aspect to it as well. So it's not just that, but that's their bread and butter. Yeah.
So they're primarily espionage based. So what have we seen over the last kind of few months? We've produced a blog on this TinyTurla
Yeah.
implant. So can maybe talk a little bit about what that TinyTurla implant is designed to do?
Yeah, so that one's really interesting. It's kind of creates like a little backdoor access for them. It's kind of a secondary backdoor to a lot of the stuff that they do, kind of a fail-safe. And again, it's one of those things where they're just trying to achieve persistence in environment, right? Like survive reboots and kind of stay there quietly and low. Um, Again, what they're doing here, what we've seen a little change, and both of the blog posts that we've recently released on these kind of go deeper in this, but we've seen them target some NGOs or non-government orgs, right? Like, and especially like Poland, and they're doing that to kind of like, try to see if they can find out when there's perhaps giving aid, to Ukraine or, something like that. And so we're seeing a little shift in some of the dynamics of what they're looking at and kind of targeting.
So we've seen them expand their tooling, and we've got a blog that focused specifically on like the 2 or 3 month campaign for TinyTurla. Maybe can we focus a little bit on that aspect, the TinyTurla-NG, I think it's called. What can you tell us about this campaign's 3 month run?
Yeah, so one of the things and the blog's really interesting, and so I'd highly recommend people to check that out for sure. But one of the things I thought was really interesting, and we're seeing a lot more sophistication from the tool set, specifically around they're leveraging both like the command.exe structure, which is a kind of a lesser one, and then a lot more of the PowerShell stuff. And what we're seeing from there is like a lot of really interesting things in terms of like not just the activities that they're doing, the lateral movement, the pulling, but also in the way that they're erasing their steps as they go to kind of really hide, right? And that portion of the blog is very fascinating, and like with the tooling, we've seen them, sorry, you see them kind of like, collect that data and then file it, enumerate it by, like a random number generator, zip it all together and exfil it all out. So all of those toolings together in one like little package. I did think it was interesting. I don't know if you saw this, but they will actually disregard MP4s in the process, surely because the
File
file
size.
is big, right? But I thought that was really interesting that they're diving through these files and they're like, oh, by the way, we don't want that. But which I thought was really kind of a fun little addition to the whole thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's been a fascinating look into how their tooling has really evolved it, and it's a much more sophisticated tooling.
Yeah, definitely. Like, lots of our recommendations usually evolve around, checking your logs, finding sticky fingerprints, as it were, like of the scenes of the crime, where the threat actor has been. But as you say, they are taking measures to try and erase where their footprints have been. This is highly sophisticated, highly evasive. So what is our advice?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's a lot of different things, and if they read the blog post, it'll enumerate where different tools might be able to help you, and kind of wrap around that MITRE framework aspect of looking at those things. But one of the things I would say is definitely, this is one of those things where, well, in the past we saw with Turla, we saw that they reached out to command and control every 5 seconds. And so you kind of start to see like where if you're having that anomalous behavior detections for things and have your analysts looking at, kind of that actionable stuff. That's one of those things that you would see that it's not a loud thing, but if you're hitting something from internal to external that often, let's chase that down, right? Like that's one of those things. Beyond that, I would say clearly that like host-based detections are really important here. There's I mean, man, I could go through each of the products because of how sophisticated they are, and across the board where you could catch them along the way. So I would really recommend reading the blog to highlight each of the sections, because I could get excited about each coverage and how it would best benefit, for sure, for each environment. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. This is a really, really interesting read for security researchers, developers, defenders in general. Great stuff on that blog, particularly if you're interested in the tooling, the command and control aspect. So we will put a link to those 2 blogs. There may even be 3 by the time we release this video
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
description.
Right.
So we'll do that. All right. Thank you so, so much, Bill. Before we go, we're going to get the latest security headlines from our colleagues over at Decipher.
Thanks, Hazel. I'm Dennis Fisher. I'm here with my colleague Lindsay O'Donnell Welch to give you a little update on this month's cybersecurity news. Lindsay, there were a couple big stories this month, and I think probably the biggest one was the LockBit ransomware takedown that you wrote about.
Yeah, it's always good to have somewhat good news in this industry.
Yeah.
So basically, law enforcement agencies from various countries came forward and said that they disrupted LockBit by targeting its technical infrastructure, making some arrests, and also releasing a decryption tool for victims to recover their encrypted files without paying a ransom. So, LockBit last year was one of the biggest ransomware groups that was out there. So this was overwhelmingly good news in the ransomware landscape. I will say, as a caveat, like LockBit did announce that its operations had resumed, so it was more of a disruption, not really a permanent takedown. But it's always good to see that, that law enforcement agencies are having more partnerships that seem to be paying off in this space.
Yeah. I love seeing the ransomware takedowns. We don't see enough of them. There's been a few others in the last few years, and they work to varying degrees, but hopefully this will be one of the ones that kind of sticks, even though we've still seen a few attacks in the last few days, I guess. The other big story, I think, was this ScreenConnect vulnerability that I think was disclosed towards the end of February, and it was one of the simplest vulnerabilities to exploit that I've ever seen in my life. Like, one of the researchers I was talking to was sort of stumbling around trying to explain how simple it was, and essentially you just had to add a backslash to a URL, and you could bypass authentication. And the biggest problem aside from that, the exploitability part of it, is that this software is in a lot of places people don't even realize. It's one of those packages that you might install one time for a support call and then forget that it was on your laptop or in a lot of laptops. And it's used by a lot of managed services providers too. So it's one of those things that's everywhere and people sort of forget about it. So and it was under active attack like within a day or two of the disclosure. So it's one of those things that will probably have a long tail too, as people sort of discover, oh yeah, we do have that in 4,000 machines in our environment. Totally forgot.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like the use of, this product by MSPs, to your point, does make it a really wide kind of threat
Yeah.
across the board there. So
Yep.
one to keep an eye on.
Yep. Definitely. All right. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you very much for watching the March Threat Spotlight from Cisco Talos. We'll be back next month. In the meantime, take care.